application will work offline. Let's consider a scenario where I send somebody an email, and while they're offline, and that email has the reflected cross-site scripting request in it, and they actually read that while they're offline. Well, because the application will actually still function offline, I could still conduct that attack. Now, I would have to somehow wait for them to go back online before it sends me the information, or maybe I'm doing something where it doesn't require connectivity, you know, I'm just wiping out their database or something. But in theory, we actually could do this offline as well. And last but not least, with traditional SQL injection, it's the actual SQL statement itself that needs to be vulnerable. You know, they've concatenated user-supplied data into that query, and that's why it's vulnerable. Here, it doesn't matter. You can have a perfectly legitimate SQL statement. It can still be vulnerable because it's the cross-site scripting angle. So the victor in my battle here is client-side SQL injection. I think it's a lot easier to do. When I was first talking about this, somebody said to me, well, what's the big deal? If they're vulnerable to cross-site scripting, I could steal their cookie, I could do the exact same damage. And in part, that's a fair statement, but overall, I don't agree with it, because stealing somebody's cookie doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be able to access their log in as them and access the data on the server for a few different reasons. Maybe that site doesn't use cookies for authentication, so getting the cookie isn't going to help you. They may have additional access controls, such as restricting the IP address that the request comes from. But also, there's no rule that says what's stored on the client side in this client-side database has to be the same as what's stored on the server side. In general, I would say it's not. In most of the things that I've seen, it's actually more of a subset of data, but it could be completely different data. So you could be attacking something completely different. So what sites are using Gears? There's many. It's really been driven a lot by Google, because Google has actually enabled a lot of their sites, and obviously they're a trendsetter. Of note, as we move into HTML5, we'll actually see Gears start to go away. So earlier this year, Google said that they're going to wind down support of Google Gears, and that wasn't surprising, because at the very beginning they came out and said, we have no intention of competing with HTML5. We just we're not ready to, we don't want to wait for HTML5, because HTML5, as I'll talk about, it's a spec that's been going on for many years. It's starting to get adopted, and browser vendors are adopting little components of it, but it will be many years before it's fully, the spec's not even done yet. So it'll be many years before all browsers have this stuff. So Gears is really more of a bridge. So not surprising. I think slowly we'll start to see it actually go away, and we'll see Google and others start to focus more on the HTML5 angle of things. Just some of the pros and cons of it. I like the fact that it requires user acceptance and says, hey, I'm going to create this relational database on your machine. They've done a good job of actually creating an implementation of SQL and SQL queries that's not vulnerable. But as mentioned, if this is implemented on an otherwise vulnerable system, doesn't matter. Let's talk about HTML5. So HTML5 getting a lot of buzz right now because a lot of people are saying, hey, this is the Flash killer. I don't totally agree with that. But it's going to bring a lot of changes to the way HTML, to the capabilities of HTML. But one of the things, so HTML5 has tons of stuff. It's a huge specification. They began working on it in 2004, finally got a working draft out in 2008, and it's only starting to be adopted. Some browsers have really adopted very little. Others, like WebKit, has been a little more aggressive. But one slice of it is what's called structured client-side storage. And that's what I'm most interested in, because that's really what's the Gears equivalent. It really has the same functionality. It has a few different storage capabilities. Session storage, you could think of that as just your traditional HTTP session cookies, a little bit more flexibility. Local storage, again, like HTTP cookies, persistent HTTP cookies. The one I'm most interested in is what they call database storage, because that is, again, that full local relational database capability. SQLite is the spec that they use for that. So from that point on, it's really the same thing as Gears. So the attack that I just talked about using cross-site scripting will work the same way against HTML5 as it worked with Gears. So what's in HTML5, just to give a little background? It has all these structural elements. Today we have div tags to kind of slice and dice up our page and treat things differently. So it really gets a little more granular there. It has very specific structural elements, headers, footers, things of that nature. But what's of more interest to me is all these APIs, cool APIs. Now we can build web applications that are a lot more interactive, do drag and drop. The video is the one that's getting a lot of buzz because now YouTube and Vimeo and all these sites are actually implementing HTML5. And what's doing that? Well, because before Flash kind of controlled the world of video on the web, but now the Apple is being a stick in the mud and saying we're not going to support Flash. So sites like YouTube are saying, okay, well, we'll enable HTML5 because WebKit-based browsers already have the capability to handle certain parts of HTML5, the video being one and the database storage being another. The challenge there is all of the browser vendors can't agree on a spec for the video. We've got Apple saying it's got to be MPEG-4, and then Firefox is upset because MPEG-4 actually isn't license-free, so they want this Ogtheora to be theirs. So anyway, it's a long way to go before we get standardized, but there's going to be all these cool new APIs that will allow you to do a lot more functionality in your web app. But again, the one I'm most interested in is that last one, offline data storage. So people say it's the Flash killer. I don't agree because you can build a very full-featured application using Flash. HTML5 is not designed to do that, but it definitely is going to make a dent, especially in the audio and video. I mean, now adding a video is no different than adding an image tag. Today we have image source, and we just pull an image in. Now, literally, video source, you pull it in, done. But all of these APIs are driven by JavaScript. So again, this really heightens the value of a cross-site scripting vulnerability because now there's so much more that I can do. Which browsers are supporting that local database storage piece of HTML5? Kind of all over the board. Really, in a nutshell, it's the WebKit-driven browsers. So that's Safari and Chrome primarily. Mobile Safari does it, though, which is really important. So mobile Safari is what's on the iPhone. So if you have an iPhone, take a look. Go into your settings, go into Safari. Yeah, and under the Safari settings, you can actually see that there's a databases flag. And then click on that, and you'll see, most likely, if you've had your phone for a while, there will be domains listed. So these are all relational databases which exist on your iPhone. SQLite format, you don't know they're there. It's not like Gears where you get a pop-up that says, hey, I'm going to create a relational database. In this case, it just does it behind the scenes. But for every one of these sites that you've been to, there is now actually a database on your phone. And Google has really pushed this. So you can see here, this is accessing Gmail, but I highlighted the airplane icon to show you that this is actually offline. I'm not online at the time that I'm doing this. And they've done this for a lot of their applications. Why? Because whereas for the desktop, they used Gears to enable this offline capability, there is no Gears plugin for the iPhone. They couldn't do that because Apple's got this more closed ecosystem. They don't want people building plugins for their browsers. So they said, hey, cool, no problem. We'll attack that with HTML5 because HTML5 gives us the same capabilities. And WebKit-based browsers already support this capability. Mobile Safari is a WebKit-based browser. And actually, I think that it is the mobile world which is really going to push adoption of this because the mobile world gives us a bit of a clean slate. We don't have all the things that we had. Whereas before we had options like Flash, we had options like Google Gears. Now we don't have those. But HTML5 can do many of those things. So I think we're going to see more adoption of HTML5 capabilities in mobile sites than we will in traditional websites. What are some of the risks associated? So this is the same thing. If I have cross-site scripting, I can still query that same database. In this case, there is no concept of the path attribute. So I can query it regardless of where on the domain this database was actually created. So think of sites that have a lot of user-supplied content. Maybe somebody else has created a cross-site scripting vulnerability. Same thing where